Hello, fellow Scratchers! Welcome back to this most exciting episode 3 of Recreating Geometry Dash in Scratch. And yes, finally, we'll be adding those most desirable particle effects. The classic Geometry Dash player rotation, and not to mention better spike hitboxes, yeah! But man, I try to make my tutorials as robust as possible, but there are times when a fellow Scratcher comments, "It doesn't work!" I know, it sounds implausible, but sometimes the smallest thing, like the size of a costume, the thickness of a line, the position or rotation of a sprite can lead to unpredictable results. Therefore, before we get into adding the cool new stuff, let's go over some of these possible problems and make sure they won't be happening again. And hopefully, as we do this, you might learn a few things too. So open our projects from episode 2, and as we begin, pop into the file menu and save the project as a fresh new copy. For this is episode 3. Guys, let's get bug squashing! The first bug we're going to cover is the dreaded instant death, most often due to the player being positioned too low down when the game begins, and the initial floor collision results in an instant game over. Now, sure, we could fix this by adjusting the initial go to XY to raise the player up out of the ground, but stick with me, because there's actually something a little more sinister at play here. In the level sprite, when the green flag is clicked, you'll remember we created our 2 level sprite clones, and you might assume that these 2 clones will appear on the screen right away. Well, actually no, they won't make an appearance until all the other green flag scripts in our project have had a chance to run. And here, in the player sprite, we have 2 such scripts. So this means, for the first frame of our game, the level clones are not visible to the player sprite. Well, without a solid white floor to hold the player up, they will surely fall down due to gravity. And then the level appears. But as you can see, the player is now even more embedded in the floor than before, and boom! Instant death bug all over again. The solution is to do what we should have done from the start and make sure that the level clones are created before the main game loop begins. Broadcast from the level sprite. A new message, game on, but only after the clones have been created. Then, back in our player sprite, we swap out the 2 when green flag click blocks, and we replace them with when I receive game on event receivers. Excellent! Order has been restored. Let's see if that made a difference. And what do you know? That did it for me, even with a small initial overlap. However, if you want to be absolutely sure that the positioning is good, stop the project, make the level sprite visible on the stage, and then drag the player until they are just level with the floor. Finally, copy the current Y position into the initial go to XY block, like so. Final test then, smash that green flag and double check that all is good. Bug squashed. Now this is interesting. By forcing the clones to execute their scripts before our main game loop, we have changed how our collisions play out. Once again. Previously, after a collision, the player was left overlapping the level, like this. But now we end up getting pushed back out of the wall after a collision. And this is actually a requested feature. You're welcome. But I'm not quite sure it's so desirable that it also occurs for spikes. Now, it's happening because the game over change X occurs right after the collision. So in effect, scrolls them right back out of the collision again. If we want to fix this just for the spikes, then before we broadcast game over here, slot in a change X position by, but for the opposite direction to the scroll. That's 0, subtract scroll speed. And in theory, that should do the trick. And a quick test just to confirm it. Yep, spike collisions are back to normal. And our wall collisions are still great. Well, okay. The next bug the player might experience is the falling through the floor. Nasty. Our player to floor collision detection strategy is based on collisions not with a whole solid level, but with a relatively thin white line. And if it's too thin, or the wrong colour, then the player can just drop right through. Not only that, but if the player is falling fast enough, it's possible for them to skip right over that thin line, missing the collision altogether. Oh! Right then. First thing to check is that your white lines are nice and thick. If they're just 1 pixel, then I'm afraid they often will not register as being white enough to trigger a collision. And that's not great. So try to ensure all your lines are at least 4 pixels wide. What's more, to ensure they are even solid when they are behind spikes, bring the line to the front. That will give your player the best chance to always detect a collision. Next up, we'll address the possibility of line skipping. Now notice that our player is 34 pixels tall. That means to skip over a line we'll need a speed Y of like -34 or more. So if we limit this speed, then the problem should go away. Find the player movement script. And just after we change speed Y by 4, pop in an if block. And check if speed Y is less than, and let's say -28. And if it is, then we set speed Y back to -28 once more. That's now a hard limit on the speed. Hopefully, if you had any issues with falling through the floor, then this will finally have sorted that out. Another bug squished. Hey, since we are sorting out all these little quirks, you may notice my player is appearing in front of the level. But had I dragged the level sprite last, then now the level sprite would appear in front of the player. We don't want this indeterministic behaviour. So, in the player sprite, drop in a go to front layer, right here at the top. Sweet. Anything else worth fixing up? The ceiling death bug. So, okay, this is not so much a bug as a mistake on my part. I was so into fixing up collisions that I forgot that touching the ceiling in Geometry Dash is actually considered a game over event. So, if you want that same functionality in your game, not to worry, it's dead easy. In our player movement script, after a collision, the first check is for the downward collisions, of speed Y less than 0, but otherwise this is a ceiling collision, so rather than just moving out of the collision, replace that custom block with a broadcast to game over. It's as simple as that. And I wouldn't be in the least bit surprised if you were way ahead of me and had already done just that. Let me know in the comments if you did. Right, now then, we are finally going to add in that player rotation that we've all been so eager to implement. Begin by checking that our player sprite is set to the all-around rotation mode. Now that's the first option here. Then we'll initialize the player in the game on script to start the right way up. Point in direction, leaving it set to 90 degrees. Perfect. Next, to make them rotate. We'll do this in the player movement script. Drop in a turn clockwise block as the first block in the script. And as for how much, I find 14 degrees works well for me. And now, if you smash that green flag, one of two things will happen. Either you'll be greeted by an oh-so-sweet rotating player, where they bob up and down as they rotate, following every contour of the level. Or, yes, sad. Like me now, I'm getting that instant death again. Well, to be honest, it's probably a good thing that I did, otherwise we wouldn't have this opportunity to see why I am. The added rotation, on top of me lowering down the player, has again caused the sprite to enter instant death territory. Well, the robust solution is to switch back to non-rotated costumes when looking for level collisions. Find the game loop under the Game On script, and from the motion category, find the Set Rotation Style block. Before calling the player movement script Set Rotation Style to Don't Rotate. Yeah, I left mine on left and right. That will work too, but Don't Rotate is probably better. This will keep the sprite upright for the collision checks. We just need to remember to restore the style afterwards. Set Rotation Style to All Around, so that once again the player will appear to be rotated as requested. And this is interesting. Running the project, you'll find we no longer have instant death, but we have lost that endearing bobbing up and down effect. Now we are gliding smoothly across the floor once more. Oh well, not to worry, because at the end of the day, we should only be rotating when the player is off the ground anyhow, right? When touching the ground, we need to level them off to the nearest flat surface. This is round their direction to the nearest 90 degrees. So scroll over to the player movement script. Again, the floor collisions are detected here. Set direction to. And we need the current direction. To snap this to the nearest 90 degrees, we first divide by 90. Then drop it into a round block. Finally, we multiply that back up by 90 again to find the nearest multiple of 90. Awesome! I am so excited to see this in action. Smash that green flag. Oh my gosh, guys, look at that! What can I say? It's just so fun. I especially love how they tumble off platform edges and do a small quarter turn. Very authentic. But hitting these spikes calls to mind another comment that gets raised again and again. That the spikes in our Geometry Dash are just too unforgiving. In the original game, spikes have a small hitbox at the centre, and that is the only part that's dangerous to touch. That explains my difficulty in jumping over the triple spikes. Now, we could emulate this effect by drawing a little coloured box in the middle of each spike, and watching out for the collisions with that instead. But I have an alternative. Instead of reducing the hitbox of each spike in our game, we can get the same effect by reducing the hitbox of the player instead. Do you see? Let's try that, shall we? Open the player costume tab, and oh gosh, we should have given the player costume a proper name. Player. Then, create a new second costume, and using the rectangle tool with a solid fill and no outline, draw out a square, 5 grid squares wide and tall, holding shift to keep it square. It should be 20 by 20 pixels. Now snap the shape to the centre of the canvas. Cool. You can see this hitbox is quite a bit smaller than the player. Give the costume a name, hitbox, and even spike, so that we know what it's for. Okay, so where in our code are we looking for a spike collision? In the main game loop of the player sprite, here it is. Ah, but we have a slight problem. To use the hitbox costume with the touching colour check here, we need to switch costumes before doing the check. But that's not possible when the touching block is part of a repeat until like this. So we'll have to do the loop check another way. Pull it out and place it in a fresh new if block instead. And if we are touching the spike colour, then it is game over. So move the game over scripts inside the new if block. One more thing. We also want to stop this script at the end to say that this is now the end of the loop. Finally, drop that all in after the player movement is complete, but still within that loop. Good. This repeat until with an empty condition will actually just end up repeating forever, so I guess we might as well make it official and switch it for a simpler forever loop. That's better. Now, just before we give it a test, we need to switch to the player's costume right up here before the game begins. If all is well, this should run just like it did before. We've only rearranged the collision check after all. But now we can look at switching to the hitbox costume to make our collisions more lenient. Immediately before the colour check, switch costume to the hitbox costume. And then, right afterwards, switch back to the player costume again. Do you see the pattern? We just need to be careful to also switch costumes back when we die. So switch costume again to player. Now what do you think? Looks about right to me. Hit the green flag. It's testing time. Oh my gosh, I got it first time. Was that a fluke? Nope, I got it again. Yeah, it's so much easier now. I really must check that. Yeah, spikes do still work. Well, that's cool. I know a lot of you will be very pleased we got this feature in here today. But there's still more to come. Yes, last but not least, we're going to add movement particles. Now, these transparent blocks fan out behind the player, giving the impression of speed and firm contact with the level. but they also stop being emitted as soon as the player leaves the ground. Okay, no problem. Let's begin by making a new sprite, naming it Particles. And then zoom right into the costume canvas, and we're going to draw a cyan square with no outline. The rectangle is 2 grid cells wide, that's 8 by 8 pixels. Snap it to the center, and we are ready to code. When green flag clicked, we go to the front layer, and then this is going to be a clone factory, so hide the original sprite. The clone should be created by the player sprite, so click in there now, finding that same old player movement script. When we are touching the level, and more specifically, when we are moving down into a collision here, this is where the particles should get emitted. So drop in a create clone of block and switch to create a clone of the particle sprite. Place it right after we move out of the level. Great, so back into the particle sprite. When I start as a clone, every new particle will begin by running this script individually. Firstly, the particles want to emit from the player, so go to player. We'll move them into place. And then we must make sure the particle is visible, show this clone. Next, we need a bit of time to animate the particle, so repeat for 10 times. And to scroll this particle left, we change x by the variable scroll speed, of course, as always. Finally, once the 10 frames are up, we delete this clone to remove it from the screen. Hey, shall we see this in action? Hit the green flag! And there we are, a very simplified Scion trail that comes right out of the player's centre. Good news too, the trail stops when we jump in the air. Hey, let's make some improvements. From the looks category, we want the change effect by block. We can fade out the particles over time with the change ghost effect, and choose a value of around 8. Yep, that's great! How about we move the trail down to begin at the player's feet? After the initial go-to block, change x by, and move left with a change x by -10. And we move down too, using a change y by -16. And here we go! That's even better! The finishing touch is to spice it up with a little randomness to make the particles spray around more. For this we need some variables. Make a new variable, speed x, and make sure to switch it to for this sprite only. Now this actually applies to clones too, so each clone will have its own speed x. Otherwise all the particles will move at the same speed and it won't look any good. Now make another variable, speed y, again for this sprite only. We'll initialize the speed variables up here. Set speed x and a set speed y. Now these values can be randomized using a pick random block with a value between 0.0 and 4.0. And the speed y can be between 0 and 3.0. Hey, if you don't know why I added that 0.0 on the end here, then I'd encourage you to try out the block yourself and see what difference it makes. Comment under the video once you've figured it out. Okay, lastly, we apply these variables to the actual movement scripts. We add speed x to the existing scroll speed here, and bring in a brand new change y by for the speed y variable. Test that. Yes, splendid! This is much improved and is almost there. All that's missing is a little variance in the sizes of the particles. No problem. Set size to, and again, use a pick random block. Good values are between 50, that's half size, and 100, that's full size. Smash that green flag, and we are done! The particle trails, the rotation, the improved hitboxes, solid collisions, and a whole bunch of other bug fixes. Wow, this is really coming together big time. I really can't wait to see how your projects look, so drop me a comment and let me know how you are getting along. And better still, share the fun by submitting them to my official Scratch Studio linked under the video. Guys, if you're enjoying these videos, I'd encourage you to click the like button to show your appreciation. And so as not to miss my next exciting video, subscribe to the channel now, checking that bell icon to ensure you are the first to know when a new video drops. But that is it for today, so thank you for watching, have a great week ahead, and scratch on guys!